Welcome to Crossroads. American ammunition may be at risk. Now, one of the key metals used to manufacture ammunition and other weaponry is antimony, and the Chinese Communist Party is now restricting the supply of that key material. This takes place on the heels of a U.S. report saying the United States may not be prepared for a large-scale war with China were it to happen, and also amid growing concerns over dependence on Chinese materials in the supply chain. The United States, to an extent, needs materials from China and has not yet established other ways of getting some of them. Now, first, let's go into these restrictions that are set to begin on September 15th. The Chinese Communist Party's Ministry of Commerce released a statement on Thursday saying that it will restrict the export of antimony, a material that hardens metals and also makes them flame retardant. Now, it's used in a wide range of military weapons like ammunition, night vision goggles, infrared sensors. And China is the world's leading producer of antimony. Now, according to U.S. Geological Survey data, China accounted for 48% of global antimony mine production in 2023. So it's not the only source, but it's one of the biggest ones. Now, the reason why the CCP is doing this, why are they doing it, right? Well, according to their statement, it's to, quote, better safeguard national security and fulfill international obligations such as non-proliferation. Reference, of course, to nuclear proliferation, where the Chinese Communist Party has stopped talks about getting rid of nuclear weapons and is notably threatening nuclear war and then accusing the U.S. of doing it. Now, it says that exports that adhere to relevant regulations will be allowed, but that the CCP opposes any country or region that uses, quote, items from China to engage in activities that undermine China's national sovereignty, security, and development interests. Now, what does that mean? The CCP is basically directing this at the United States. Well, not saying it's directed at the United States, and maybe NATO and Western Europe to an extent. Because, of course, the United States and Western Europe are supporting, again, Ukraine in its war against Russia. The CCP is supporting Russia in that war. And as Ukraine is now pushed into Russia and is actually getting some cards they can put on the table for a peace deal, because that's what they were lacking, notably, the CCP seems to be very unhappy about this. Now, remember, the Chinese Communist Party was blocking the peace deal, right? The CCP was encouraging countries to not go and meet with Ukraine to talk about any kind of peace deal. And the CCP instead was trying to get Zelensky to agree to its deal. The problem Zelensky had was that what is he going to have to bet on? What does he have to play other than ending the war? Is he going to say, okay, we'll surrender this territory if you give us back this one? What does he have to bet on? What does he have to negotiate on? Nothing. Now that they've pushed into Russia, they have some cards to play. The Chinese Communist Party seems very unhappy about this, and notably Russia doesn't seem like it's able to properly deal with that situation. And so given this, Ukraine actually kind of changed the tides of the war. The CCP seems very unhappy about that. The other side of it, of course, has to do with what's happening in the South China Sea. U.S. supporting the Philippines, notably. The Philippines aligning with Japan. Japan also working alongside Taiwan now. And that whole defensive alliance that's being built is a direct threat in the CCP's eyes. And so the Chinese Communist Party is blaming the United States for supplying weapons to Taiwan to help Taiwan not attack the CCP, but defend itself were the CCP to attack. They're not very happy about this. And so what's happening right now when the CCP talks about growing threats and things that undermine its interests and so on, it's a reference to these things. And the CCP is notably now restricting a material that's needed to create this ammunition and other things. But it's probably not going to work out too well for China, and I'll explain in a bit. Now, look, at the moment, we're not clear as to what extent they will block the export of antimony. Again, they're not quite saying it clearly. But the wording from the CCP is pretty indicative of what they're trying to do. Terms like safeguard national security, non-proliferation, development interests. They're all ways the CCP is saying this is about growing military tensions between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and also the trade war, because it's not just the international conflicts, it's also like, U.S. restrictions on semiconductors, and the CCP looking for things that it can hold in kind of a tit-for-tat kind of move, right? Now look, even though the statement of the CCP says that these policies are not targeted at any specific country or region, it's almost without a doubt targeted at the United States. And I think it's kind of clear on the surface, frankly. Now, this will very likely just speed up a trend that's already starting. Now, on the other side of this, ironically, what the CCP is doing will not make the United States just stop manufacturing ammunition or stop making night vision goggles or infrared or anything. It's just going to look for other supply chains. And if the CCP is supplying, 48%, that means there's other places that do it. And the U.S. is trying to even create trade deals with certain Middle Eastern countries and Middle Asian countries and so on, looking to increase the production of rare earth minerals and other things. It's just going to speed up that process. And they can also look at existing facilities and mines and so on that produce it and just make them increase output. Because one of the problems they have oftentimes is the CCP just undercuts them on the market. It's not that they can't manufacture more of something in many cases, it's that it's not financially feasible to manufacture more. And so by putting restrictions on this, ironically, what the CCP has ended up doing is forcing foreign countries, not even just businesses, entire countries, to begin looking at their supply chain threats. And when it comes to not even just antimony, but other key materials, this is going to be taken into account. Because what's going to be happening now that the CCP has done this is they will say, if we have a conflict with China, if they're, and notably we're in a state right now of increased conflicts and increased hostilities from the CCP, notably, the CCP is, of course, backing Iran. It's backing, of course, Latin American dictatorships, including, for example, in Venezuela, where it backed Maduro, while the U.S. backed the opposition party as the winners of the election. The Chinese Communist Party is positioning itself against the United States in almost every major region right now. So the trend is more conflict, not less. It's more tension, not less tension. Given that situation, the United States will look and say, well, you're cutting off our access to something we need. Well, it's this one today. What if it's this other one tomorrow? And so they need to, because of this, begin thinking about the future of our supply chain stability. Would we have the iron we need to, of course, continue production of different things? Would we have the different types of ores? There's a lot of them. Would we have the other rare earth minerals? What happens if the CCP tries to cut off our access to medications? All of these things will be taken into account alongside this. Now, there's something else going on. Even going back to the Obama administration, right? It was under Obama, it was under Trump, it's actually even under Biden. They were talking about supply chain threats. And notably, this is what happened. There were studies done during the Obama administration where the U.S. military realized that we were dependent to an extent on the Chinese Communist Party for certain types of materials needed to manufacture a lot of our military equipment. The big buzzword going around was supply chain threats. And they wanted to find a way to make sure our military was able to function were a conflict with China to take place. Because remember, during the Obama administration, they did the Asia pivot, right? Where they began moving different military assets to the Asia-Pacific region. That was when the United States notably started doing freedom of navigation operations as the CCP laid claim to most of the South China Sea. Now, given that situation, of course, it was taken into account that the military at the time, our fighter jets, our tanks, just about everything, was to an extent reliant on components from China. This wasn't just metals or things like that. It was even minute pieces within some of the electronics equipment. Now, the full report was never publicly released, but what was released, the redacted report, suggested that there might be some kind of internal systems that maybe were non-functional in even American fighter jets, and that could even be remotely turned off were a conflict to happen. That raised some serious concerns over whether the CCP, in the event of a war, because of our reliance on it for many of these components, could just hit a switch and turn off our jets, for example. That was the big concern at the time. Now, they said over the course of time that they got rid of the biggest threats, but to an extent they never fully resolved the full supply chain threat. Again, they tried doing it under Obama, they tried doing it under Trump, and it's still a buzzword under Biden. And what we're seeing right now is an example of a very real supply chain threat. One of the things that was warned about that the CCP could hypothetically do back in 2010, they're actually doing now, where they've cut off access to the U.S. on a key material needed to manufacture military equipment.